But that's always my go-to. Right. Spoken here. Hi everybody, and hi everybody on the Zoom. Everybody in the Zoom. Today we're really excited to have Dr. Emily Atwell with us. She is a therapist currently at, remind me where you are now.
So I own my own private practice.
Right. Okay, yeah. Awesome. In private practice here in the area. She grew up in a family of therapists, fostering a deep fascination of relationships at an early age. Led her to study psychology and child development, and then get her master's in licensed clinical social worker after her master's in social work. Mm-hmm. That's the right word. And her expertise is in marriage and family therapy. And she's licensed here in Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Is that right? And today she is going to be taking us through a lot of different things. So we're going to be looking at not just skills to use with clients in a transaction, but also for ourselves, like how we find that balance, how we work on our own mental health, so we can be more present for our clients as well. So, Dr. Emily Atwell,
thank you so much. I appreciate being here. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So another role that I play, I'm actually also a professor at Penn. I teach MSW students how to be therapists, essentially. So I do a lot of different things. But I say that because the skills that I'm going to talk to you about today are really transferable to pretty much everything, in being a human being. So I hope that you can hear me. I'm not going to get the language right, so you got to correct me. I have no idea what to say in terms of the role people play. But yeah, just correct me as we go. I'd love for this to be collaborative. For this to be, interrupt me, no worries, okay? I just want to get a sense of who we have in the room today. So what roles do you all play?
I'm a real estate agent.
Real estate agent, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I work in the finance department.
Okay, great.
I'm a recruiter.
Recruiter, okay.
So same thing, also on the vendor program.
Okay, great. I don't know what that means.
Okay, so we have like preferred vendors, so I work with other companies that are that.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
so.
And I'm a realtor and a team leader.
Perfect. Okay. Great. I don't know if you know Jen Tojine. She was supposed to be here today. I think she's under the weather. She's on here, hopefully.
She's also a real estate agent.
She's also a real estate agent. Yeah. She was my real estate agent. And also my best friend. So we have that. And that's going to be important as I go along, because one thing that I'd like to start out with is this. So Jen actually really helped me in the beginning with sort of understanding the real estate space in a way I had never thought about it before. Because really, a mental health professional and a real estate person, very similar in terms of the skills you need, in terms of the qualities you have as people, right? And I never really thought about it that way until sort of Jen educated me. So I was appreciative. But I'm wondering if we can generate some thoughts here about how they intersect. Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of barriers that need to be overcome when somebody is looking to purchase something.
Yeah.
I think, a lot of times there's hang-ups because it's such a large amount of money to, somebody wants like everything to be perfect. And
yeah.
In life, nothing is perfect.
Lovely, beautiful. That's a great way to start, right? Because nothing is perfect. No person or situation is going to be perfect. And how do we navigate that when people want that, right?
Right.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Hello. Good. Anybody else?
I definitely think that we kind of become the arbiter of people's emotions, because whether they're heightened in positive or negative ways, they are more likely to express them to us. And if you're working with couples, often more likely to you than each other. So you do kind of become that middle person.
So you get to, we're just like I am in my role. I'm triangulated all the time between, so-and-so and, I'm the go-between of communication. And I imagine that's similar to how you experience it. Okay, good.
I think their similarities lie within both of those roles. You're basically working on building trust by way of getting how their personality is.
Yep.
Seeing if you guys can fit, if you guys can communicate and understand and know what each one wants from the other. So I think that's where the similarities lie, which is all based on trust, if I'm not mistaken.
So it's very similar to like interviewing somebody for a job, essentially. Or I actually experienced it a little bit as like asking someone out on a date. It's like, you're like, is this person a good fit? Are you gonna be blended well together? Are you gonna be able to communicate together, right? And so it's very interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
I also think there's an intersection where, like, having housing can lead to better mental health.
Okay, yeah,
You know,
stability.
Exactly, housing insecurity can cause, issues in terms of.
Yeah, lovely, great. Good. So it's not that hard to come up with ways this intersects, but we don't often think about it. So just keep that in the back of your mind as we go along. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Min. So yeah, the intersectionality, the convergence of multiple concepts or identities. And I think when it comes to the work that I've been doing in like fair housing, I've been doing a lot of advocacy work with Asian Americans in homeownership and LGBTQ communities. And if you look at homeownership rates in those communities, they're lower than other demographics due to housing discrimination and due to a lot of external forces and implicit biases that impacts tenants and buyers in the real estate process. So there's a lot of interpersonal and then also external factors that creates a lot of mental health impacts and symptoms in people that are using real estate in their lives as a tenant, a homeowner. And then I think also realtors are always in the go, we're like in this like hyper sensitive time frame, and we're always like time is of the essence, like we're always like paranoid about all the situations that may be happening, especially in a transaction or a deal or just generally in our industry. So I think there's a heightened sense of alertness that creates an impounding and compounding effects on our mental health.
Absolutely. One of the things we're going to talk about in a minute is this idea of working within systems. So you work within multiple systems, multiple identities at the same time. And that can be beautiful, right? But also very layered and complicated and busy and all the things. So, yeah. Okay. So, when someone purchases a home, there's a huge transaction involved, right? Some people view it as just a transaction, like handing over money and, getting lending, like mortgages, etc. Is that your goal, to make it transactional though? I imagine not, right? So, one thing that I would encourage, and which is exactly what I imagine you're already doing, is be curious. So asking questions like, what are the expectations of the people that you're working with? What are their goals? What would helpful communication look like? What would that even be? What would boundaries look like, right? So am I able to text my agent at 11 at night on a Friday or whatever day of the week, right? Is that okay? How do we communicate that, right? And then also asking, what role would you like the person to play, right? Whether it's the agent, again, I'm terrible with like what roles people play. So fill in the blank with whatever role when I'm saying agent, okay, if you don't mind. But in other words, like being forthright, transparent from the beginning of what role. Right. I had an interesting situation. So Jen was my real estate agent. And I was like 100% sold on her being my real estate agent. My husband was not. And not because it's Jen, but because he knew that he was going to be the third wheel. Does that make sense? He knew that it was going to be Jen and me talking about these houses, right? And he was just going to be like there for the ride. Does that make sense? Right? And so we had to talk a lot about how to make it more relational so that
He's included.
He's included, obviously, he needs to be included, right? But then also, like, what role is Jen gonna play? And the other thing we talked about is Jen kind of knows more about my finances than I do now, right? It's like, how do we work with that? So he had to be willing and to put the vulnerability out of like, hey, this is what we're bringing to the table. Jen knows all of this now, and she's also my best friend, right? So how do you navigate that? Jen, did you want to chime in here?
Jen Singley?
Jen,
That's fine.
are you there?
Yeah, I can. I remember, so Wayne is very, for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm very bubbly and enthusiastic, and Wayne is very business and analytical, and so he is very good at what he does, and I think he was very nervous of injuring our relationship because he's very cut to cut to the chase, which he knows is not my personality. And so it was about having a conversation of, hey, we can deal this and we can do it. We can handle this and we can talk about what works for you, what works for me, and if it will be a good fit, right? And it was a really beautiful conversation to be able to have early on in a relationship with someone, right? It was probably a little bit easier because I knew him, but what a powerful conversation to have with anyone early on in the real estate, relationship.
And I wasn't worried about it, right, from my end, of course. But I had to think, we had to think systemically, in other words. Okay? And that was beautifully handled by everybody, I think. Not all the time, I imagine that happens. So, have you been in situations where you get triangulated between perhaps two people buying a home? What do you notice when that happens?
They tell you different things about the same.
Okay. Yep. So they tell you different things. They might not be on the same page, and they want you to like convince the other person. That could happen. Okay. What else?
There's a power struggle.
Yes. Okay. And then all of a sudden, in whatever role you play, you are in the middle. What do you do with that? Hard to navigate, right? Absolutely. Okay. So the 7 kind of concepts that I'm going to be talking about here are the things that are transferable to everybody's lives, every relationship. Okay, so this is not just in the real estate space. The first one, being human. So it's kind of obvious, right? Like we're all human. However, how many of us are perfect? Anyone perfect in this room?
My mom says I am.
Your mom said that. Okay. I was hoping somebody would raise their hand for the purposes of my point.
90% perfect.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I come incredibly close.
Yeah.
The limit is not exist.
So
It's a big one.
you're all entering into this space as human beings who we're not perfect. We have strengths and weaknesses, right? And the degree to which each of us has integrated those has said, hey, I accept myself for my flaws, and I really appreciate the things I'm great at, right? And holding space for both is important. Not everyone does that well. Not everyone has that insight, okay? So connecting on the level of human being, what I like to say is that's connecting on the level of emotion. Okay, so Zach, I think Zach, right? Yeah, you mentioned that oftentimes there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of things happening at once, a lot of moving parts, right? What can happen in that moment? How much emotion is being shared? A lot of emotion, but no words to describe emotion. Does that make sense? Okay, so screaming at each other, crying, everybody's like anxious, whatever is happening, but nobody says I feel whatever, right? So literally using that language can be very helpful. Asking, what are you feeling? Give me one word to describe how you're feeling. Have you ever been in a situation where someone says, how do you feel? And then you get a thought. I feel like, and then they go on a tangent of what they're thinking. That makes sense? Feeling is just one word, okay? So connecting on the level of feeling. So somebody might say, I feel very anxious. I feel frustrated. I feel angry, right? You might not be able to relate on a personal level to what they're angry about or what they're anxious about, but you can relate to the feeling. Everybody has had those feelings. Okay, so that's important. Just anytime I'm connecting with anybody, right, regardless of who they are, you want to access the emotion underneath. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Would
you ask like your client in our situation, like, oh, how do you feel about this? Like you would say that to them, like just to see what they say back about
Yeah.
whatever situation.
So it depends on the relationship you have with the client, how much you can kind of dig into that with somebody. But if they are showing outwardly an emotion, you might say, it seems like you're feeling blank, right?
Right.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
Right? And see what they say. Because sometimes you need to be given the language. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right? And then you say, I can totally understand your feeling of whatever, right? I've never been in your situation, but I have felt that feeling before. And it's surprising how helpful it can be. So Jen, I don't mean to continue to calling you out, but the day before we're gonna sign the contract to buy our house, I had a gigantic panic attack. It's like, I've never spent this much money in my life. How am I going to do? And I was off for the races completely. My husband's over there stoic as ever, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I've never been able to, fathom this amount of money in my life ever. And Jen basically did exactly what I just described, saying, okay, what are you feeling? Right? And I was able to identify, I'm feeling very anxious. I'm feeling a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty. And then because she's also a therapist, I don't know if you do that, but she's also a therapist. So she has the beautiful skill to be able to say, hey, let's talk about that. Let's dig deeper into that. What do you need to feel grounded in this moment? Right? And that was super helpful. And then the next day we went in and it was a great, experience. But talk about your experience as agents, right? What would happen if you had a client have a major panic attack?
Like I have a situation, so I'm representing a buyer and a seller right now, so I'm a dual agent, you call that,
Okay.
where you're representing the listing and you're bringing your own buyer to that listing.
Yep.
So we're in the middle of a reply to buyer inspection. So my buyer wants a credit for, the repairs and stuff that's needed in the house, and she's like getting angry about it. So it's like, you're kind of in the middle of both sides. And it's, I'm to the point where I'm like, okay, well, I just want to make everybody happy, like meeting somewhere in the middle, and then her husband is also a lawyer and an attorney. So he's kind of in her ear a lot as well. I think she's more willing to give credits and repairs because she wants the buyer to have a good experience. But like I have to have a conversation with them and like after this, how do you want to move forward?
So beautiful, right? So can I?
Yeah.
One of the things I'm hearing from you is the importance of being curious, right, for everybody involved. Because if you were to ask each of them, what questions could we ask in this moment that would be helpful? Right.
Like I guess I want to ask her like what would, in another sense, like well, what would make you happy?
Yeah.
But like also have to make the buyer happy as well, because there are some things wrong with that.
Absolutely. The other question I might ask is what additional information do we need to be able to move forward? Because maybe we haven't addressed somebody's experience yet. Maybe one person has been quiet, or maybe one person has been super loud but not really saying anything.
Well, right.
Right. So what additional information do we need, and what questions can we ask to help the process along? Okay. Oh, hi. I love dogs. Okay, so it's pretty much it's pretty well known, but not really research backed, that about 30% of who we are is what we show outwardly. Okay, about a third. So the other 2/3 we don't show to people. Those are the things that we only show to the people we're most intimately connected. Okay, so that means that you got a bunch of people showing just the 30% of themselves in this major transaction, life-altering decision that they have to make, probably, right? It's a lot of things that are not being said, not being talked about, not being addressed, right? Some of them are ugly. Some of them are not the prettiest things ever, right? And so how do you make room for those things to come out or to create safety for that to happen without kind of playing the role of therapist, so to speak? What do you think? Oftentimes, it's all about integrating. So holding space for both and, right? Saying, I am both good at and not good at blank. That makes sense? So let me give you an example. A weakness that I have that I've integrated and I've done a lot of work on myself is I have a ton of anxiety. I have had anxiety my whole life. But what integration looks like is being able to say, hey, I actually appreciate my anxiety now because it's provided a compass for me, right? It's guided me in certain directions that I don't know that I would have gone. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. So taking a weakness and saying, hey, yeah, this hasn't been ideal. We've been on a journey, right? But how do you kind of make sense of it in a way that has been adaptive? So having dialogue about you're working with people. Tell me about, what you feel good about in yourself. Maybe you don't do this. Maybe that's not conversation you might have, but you're going to get at people's weaknesses. This is going to come up, right? Whether they want to show you or not, that will be transparent, right? So how do you have that conversation with them? Hey, so what's your weakness? Making it sort of blunt. What do you think?
You volunteer your own kind of just demonstrate being like, I know this about me, this is a weakness that I have, and here's a way that here in the process we'll overcome that, and I have these systems in place for that. Like, I know for me, I'm really bad at details. Yeah. I'm great at big picture, which is why I have a transaction coordinator. And so I get my like, I am not good at these things. This is Lauren. Yeah. She's phenomenal. Yeah. Kind of embracing that too.
Okay.
I think in the context of a real estate transaction, asking somebody specifically, like, do you think that there's anything that would hold you back from completing this transaction? Because it's kind of a way to say, what are your weaknesses without saying what are your weaknesses?
What are the barriers? Right. Absolutely. I love that question. Right? Yeah. So we lost 3 people. Is it because we talked about weaknesses?
Okay. You probably got a phone call.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes you got
I just wanted to make sure it wasn't like, you're uncomfortable sitting on our weaknesses or something. No. Okay. All right. The other thing that happens a lot in life is that we make attributions of other people. We're making judgments. You're making judgments of me. I'm making judgments of you, whether we like it or not. Mm-hmm. That's just going to happen, right? So sometimes those attributions can be completely spot on, completely true, right? Sometimes they're not. Okay, so what do you do with that? All right, so you're being interviewed as an agent, right? They are going to make judgments of you from the beginning, right? How does that feel?
Like, that's the job you signed up for.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Like in the beginning, when I got my license when I was 23, so I was young.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, how am I going to start? Like, no one's going to trust me to sell their house, So that's one thing when I was younger that I struggled with in the beginning. Yeah. And then once you start selling 1 house and 2 houses, people are like, oh, I trust her. She knows what she's doing.
Good. So that's a beautiful example of how attributions can be proven or disproven based on trust. Mm-hmm. Based on integration. So I've been told that I'm super uptight. I am uptight, 100%. Jen would be the first person to say it, right? That is something that I have completely accepted, right? Like, that's just me, right? So being able to say that, if I were to say, I'm not uptight, what are you talking about? And completely showing defenses would not be integrating a thought about yourself or an attribution. So the biases that we have automatically about others, how does that show up in your engagements?
Be an example, like, yeah. So I could relate.
So we used to live in New York, and so we were looking at buying house in New York before coming here. And we were doing the interviewing of multiple agents. And this is so frustrating. Every time we would interview, it would be the person only talking to my husband.
I do the opposite. So I always talk to the wife or the guy.
We're both sitting
Well,
right? Imagine the two of you are a couple and you introduce yourself and you go, hi,
right.
I'm completely biased. I'm talking 3 times. So what bias am I gonna have? Showing in. I mean, exactly.
I think that's actually, that plays in pretty much every industry, I think.
Absolutely.
And no matter where
Yeah.
you go, I think like, so in the finance world, you don't find too many women in the finance world, usually controllers or, financial analysts, man.
Yep.
Waitresses,
Mhm.
waitresses mostly females.
Mhm.
I think that's everywhere almost. So I think,
Yeah. Like maybe they thought, oh, your husband's making the decision. He's
Yeah.
the decision maker.
for the men run the world
Yeah.
type of mentality.
Assuming it's the one who makes the money.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But I, as an agent, I always know, because I used to sell cars. So I always know when a wife and a husband are in front of me, happy wife, happy life, that's number one.
Correct.
And then number two, you also don't want the wife to feel like, oh, you're only talking to the husband and like,
Yeah.
there's a weird thing going on. Like, no, I always look at the wife first and then I just make eye contact with both.
Yeah.
You gotta include both,
So I work with whole families a lot of the time. So parents, children. I always introduce myself first to the child. And see how the parents respond to that.
I like that.
Right? Yeah. Because the child's attribution of me is actually probably more important than the parent's attribution of me if you're a family therapist.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
It actually does, when I waitress, whenever I had family that came to my table, I always spoke to the kids
The
first.
kids first. Yeah.
That's funny.
So think about how attributions play into your encounters, not only in your roles, but in your lives.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And we don't often notice them.
I think we do it with other agents too, when we're in transactions. Sometimes we like, well, I mean, we
Yeah.
either by reputation or by lack of reputation, you go in thinking this is what the experience will be like. But oftentimes that is wildly incorrect. Oftentimes, not as often, but it is wildly correct. But so many times it is
Right. Yeah.
completely inaccurate, like stating the pieces of things that we know about or around them and not actually them.
So again, you want to check yourself, right? I'm having this judgment. It might be 100% accurate. Like, this person could be a complete ass. You know what I mean? Like, that's totally possible. But maybe they're not. Right? And so what do you do with that? You got to check yourself. Just like they have to check themselves. Okay? So I'm going to give you a challenge here. I want you to describe yourself without talking about any roles you play, achievements you've had, status, or possessions.
Okay, I'll start. So describe myself as a human being. I think I'm approachable, easygoing, empathetic. I'm a good listener. I think I do my best with what I'm given and with what I have and who I'm dealing with.
Beautiful. So what I know about you is I already feel like I could open up to you. Right? I already feel like I could have a conversation about a lot of those things that we have in common. I feel like I have some sense of your story. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
When you describe yourself without all the other crap on your resume, right? You actually understand who the person is, right? I always, whenever I'm interviewing somebody, which isn't very often, but whenever I do, I ask that question. Because they're gonna fall back on, I went to such and such school and I did this and I've done X number of things, right? I don't care.
Right.
It does not matter to me.
I think though that's primarily for me, I think that's primarily because I didn't achieve those things. I went a different route in my life, so there's no prominent educational achievements, no big acquisitions in life.
Yep.
My life was simple, so what I thought was more important for me was
Beautiful.
basic, simple things. I think human interaction, like how I relate to my family, because I started a family so young, that's what I base everything off of.
Beautiful, right? So Ren, you just showed a great deal of vulnerability. And that's what it comes down to. We oftentimes hide behind all of the achievements and all of the other stuff, the status, right? But
I did the opposite.
you got down to you got underneath the surface, whatever that side of the iceberg, right? You went deeper, right? That is what I imagine you need to do when you're in a relationship in whatever capacity. Yeah.
Which is interesting because it's kind of the counterintuitive in our industry
Of course.
is that you lead with
Yes.
accolades.
I was
You
just
lead
saying,
with
right?
numbers. You lead with why I'm the best of the best, all the reasons that are printable on a one sheet. And so it's hard. I think that's potentially why a lot of folks in the position of real estate agents struggle outside of the work because the work becomes so all defining that you lose a sense of like what else am I beyond.
Absolutely. I actively don't search for people who've gone to an Ivy League. No offense if you have. I have, obviously, right? So it was in my bio. But like, because oftentimes there's a judgment and attribution that I'm making that you're gonna just be completely, I went to such and such school and I had a GPA of whatever, you know. No idea who you are. You know? So we don't exist in isolation. Everything we do impacts somebody else. It's just impossible not to. So thinking about everyday systemic thinking. So just to get to work today, maybe you took the train, maybe you took the bus, maybe you drove, maybe you walked, whatever it is, right? You had to think systemically just to get here. So let's give an example. Let's give some examples. You have to think about somebody else. Yeah.
I'll start.
Okay.
I'm dog sitting right now
Okay.
in an unfamiliar part of the city. So I had to account for how early I'd have to wake up to walk and feed the dog.
Yep.
Get myself ready, then I had to take 2 trains,
Yep.
maybe a transfer, walk here, remember the door code.
There's a lot of things that you needed to plan ahead of time to get, right?
Exactly.
And a lot of areas where it probably might not have gone well.
Yeah, I mean, dog threw up a couple of times. Maybe a little bit later.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this isn't necessarily something that you might, directly experience with your clients, but you're going to directly experience it with your clients. You know what I'm saying? Right? Because you're interacting with multiple people who have different lives, different, stuff happening, right, at any given time. Okay? It's fascinating doing my work when somebody cancels, like 5 minutes before the session.
Ooh, they get charged.
So this is the thing, right? If I charge them on that, right? Yeah. Right. If I don't charge them, I lose X number of dollars.
And
That
they
then
do it again.
impacts me in my life if you do it again. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So navigating those boundaries is like, ooh,
Yeah.
do I want to be the asshole or do I want to make X number of dollars? Does that make sense? So
You need to respect your time.
it's all about boundaries. It's all about being able to think systemically. Putting that in the room is something I frequently do when it becomes a pattern. Right? But it requires me to be able to say, hey, let's think beyond her for a second, I'm just saying. All right, so processing out loud. A moment ago, when 3 people left at the same time, I just processed out loud. No offense, Tom, it was totally fine.
Okay.
I was making.
Sorry, I just had to handle it.
I mean, it was all. It was
I know, I don't know,
No
yeah, you
worries.
got up and I was like, oh no.
It was, no,
I was going
it
international, but I mean.
actually set me up for the perfect example.
Okay, good.
No problem. But essentially, right, I could have interpreted that a lot of different ways. Right? That makes sense? So what was happening if I'm interpreting it as rejection? What's happening in the room? What am I seeing?
Losing your.
Losing the crowd.
Yeah, I'm losing the crowd. Nobody likes me.
It reflects on your self-worth.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Right. So not at all, not at all, right? If I'm an integrated self and I think, okay, everybody has busy lives. Maybe someone has to go to the bathroom, maybe they
Right.
got a phone call, like no idea what's going on, right? Then I'm gonna view the situation in a much different way. Processing out loud is calling out the elephant in the room. I called out the elephant in the room. Everybody else noticed that 3 people left at the same time, correct? Maybe not in the front, I don't know, but. Right, so if I hadn't called that out, we would be sitting with, ooh, what do we do? I don't know, it's super awkward, I don't know what to say, So oftentimes processing requires you to call out the elephant.
But what if someone's avoided? Like, what if you call someone out, like, oh, what's going on, what are you thinking about, and then they're avoided? No, I don't want to talk about it.
You're still calling it out, which makes them more aware,
Got it.
makes more insight. They might not be able to engage, they might not be super integrated, 100%, right? But at least you're doing your part in calling it out.
What do you say? Oh, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
This might be too broad of a question for the scope of what we're talking about
Sure.
here, but I guess the thing that I struggle with is like, when is it appropriate to hold your tongue and when should you vocalize, your feelings about a particular situation?
So that's gonna be reading the room completely.
I think we see that when we're with clients sometimes, like especially like if we're out with buyers and we've been out before, you can tell that there's something different about how they are experiencing that situation compared to, so even just being like, hey, I can tell something is bothering you today, or that something is off. You don't have to talk about it, but I just want you to know that you need to, I'm here, or, just because you can tell.
Yeah. So on that point, Dan, right? How can you tell? What are the things the person's putting out? Yeah.
I think just like general tonality, maybe body language,
Tone of voice.
the way they're speaking to you, like if they're more direct, they expect direct back.
Good.
Yeah, but you can, like you said, you can tell if someone's a little more on the gentle side,
Good.
quieter, not a little more reserved, then you can be a little easy on them.
Great.
They want you to be direct, and then be direct.
A lot of it comes down to your ability to sit with the awkwardness.
Right.
Too. That makes sense? Everybody's different with that. Okay? So here are some examples that we pointed out. Tone of voice. All of a sudden I'm starting to talk to you like this.
Totally normal.
I'm not saying anything that's like, right? But how I'm saying it is like, whoa.
Yeah.
Immediately there's distance between us. You're like, I don't want to come near you.
Yeah.
That makes sense? Okay. Absolutely. You always do this, or you are never doing this right, or always and never, right? Are 2 words that can create a ton of distance between people. So notice when that happens. We do it all the time. Part of our everyday language. But notice the impact it has on, the people around you. Body language.
But see, but for some, and I'm speaking for me, this crossed arm thing, I know I've heard that it's not the most welcoming and that it's very standoffish. But for me, it's
Totally could be your fault. For me, I'm always cold.
I just always do.
I always do this too. right?
Yeah.
I've done this without doing the intervention of the processing. I've been doing this the whole time, right? I'm not trying to be like, ooh, don't go near me, right? I'm trying to be like, this is just how I stand.
Yeah.
You know? But for somebody else who that's off-putting, that might be a deal breaker.
Or an example, like if someone who's not normally, they're more like handsy with the way they speak,
Yeah,
and they're all of a sudden crossing their arms.
Yeah.
And nothing else has changed, it's still, sure.
so the key would be is to navigate whether or not you call out body language. I noticed your body language just changed. Help me understand what's happening for you in this moment. That would be ideal. That'd be great. If the person can say, oh, well, I feel, uncomfortable, or I feel whatever, right? It doesn't always happen. Yeah.
I feel like with body language, it's something that comes with familiarity. And like after you spend a long time with somebody or interact with them, then you can get cues on, even if they don't notice that they're doing it.
Yep.
Then you can say, okay, you can associate that with you're about to get angry.
Right.
So you can know without them even knowing that they're doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of it, you don't even know that you're doing it, right? And so that's another part of the problem, right? So attributions, people are making attributions about you based on mannerisms, based on body language. You might not even be aware you're doing,
Right.
right? So that can be hard. Language is a manager of distance. Cursing. This is the big one. Okay, so how many times have you been in situations where cursing is completely like welcomed and no worries, and like you're actually kind of part of the crowd if you curse back?
Most of the fucking time.
Like
Yeah.
90% of it.
Right, absolutely. So sometimes fuck is like the most appropriate word to use. You know what I mean? Like 100%.
Yeah.
Right? So what happens if you're in the room with somebody who like hates cursing or
Oh, and you just turn
finds
them
it so disrespectful?
Yeah.
Right? So oftentimes it's either cursing is either something that brings people closer together or it's something that separates.
Yeah.
And you gotta know which one it is
Right.
a lot of the time. It's weird. I have a 2 and a 5-year-old, and my daughter the other day could not open something. She's like, and I'm like, this is the thing though, right? Like as a therapist, I'm like, that is a totally reasonable expression of frustration.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, I would do the same thing
Yeah.
if I couldn't open something. You know what I mean? So I'm not gonna get mad at her for doing something that's completely okay in
It's
my
an
book.
expression.
But then what happens when she goes to school
And
she's just like all the time, right? She's going to kindergarten in a month. Like, what do I do there? So you got to think about it. I actually thought it was hilarious, right? And it brought us closer together. But at school, that's not going to fly, right? So it's just something interesting. All right. I'm really enjoying this time today with all of you. Really enjoying it. Really. So process and content are incongruent. Somebody goes, I'm fine. Totally. That's happened a lot, I'm sure, right? So what do you do with that?
How you did it doesn't sound it.
Doesn't sound. The
Oh,
vibe you're
right.
giving off is, I can tell by your tone of voice that, right? Yeah. So why do we do that as humans? Why do we have process and content be incongruent?
Defensive.
It's defensive, oftentimes. Yeah. We don't actually want to show how we feel. So we're trying to just appease the situation.
Yeah.
Some of us are better at it than others. So identifying process, calling it out, oftentimes creates more intimacy.
That was a very good flow chart. Yeah. I actually like that was a good consolidation of all of those kind of
Yeah.
intersectional
Yeah.
concepts, how we use our voice, tonality, body. So I'm a trained dancer, modern ballet.
Yeah.
So whenever I move is kind of like
Mhm.
Like, I'll just do a pirouette or I'll move in a dancer type way. I'm also Vietnamese American, so we're very expressive, like we curse and we're loud, but I also lived in Tokyo and that's a very mechanical society where everyone's very much like bowing, space, like don't give any expressions. So I'm always at the dichotomy of multiple kind of cultures where I have to adapt, and a lot of people call it code switching.
Yeah.
So like sometimes when I speak to a particular type of person or in a specific group, I'll change my body language, my tone of voice, even the quote unquote masculinity, femininity tonality that LGBTQ people sometimes maladapt. So like, you know, if I'm talking to Monique, I'm like, hi Monique, how are you? You look amazing. If
Yeah.
I'm talking to a dude, like, yo bro, what's up?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so there's a coping and also like a code switching. I know, right? And you do this too, right? In certain situations. I also went to an all boys, all white Catholic high school. So there's a lot of adaptability you have to do.
Beautiful.
And so I think it's a good thing, but it's also like sometimes that can come off as
That's the same.
inauthentic, but I do feel like I'm very genuine about how I express
That's
myself.
also knowing who you're addressing. When
Yeah.
everybody's different, not everybody's the same, so you're gonna treat everyone differently and address
Yeah.
everyone differently, depending on who they are.
Being versatile is
Yeah.
key to both of our worlds.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like I could meet a first-time home buyer who's my age and I could be chill with her. And then I can meet a 60-year-old guy in finance and I have a different persona, you know, like it's just how you carry
So-
yourself.
I don't, maybe this isn't appropriate, but I feel like we're close now. Yesterday, my clients in a row, literally, I spent an hour talking about masturbation. The next hour I spent talking to a 10-year-old about starting school.
Right.
The next hour after that, I spent talking to a couple screaming at each other about getting divorced. The next after that, I talked to a 15-year-old who is struggling with their identity, right? Like in a 4-hour period.
That's a lot of different switch ups, like,
Right? So you have to shift. You have to shift.
yeah.
Does that make sense? Right? So
Sounds like my day.
I can totally get that. Right? All right. So if I start screaming at you, okay, I'm like, maybe you're totally into it. Maybe you like screaming. I don't know. But a linear type of response would be, Emily, it seems like you're getting angry. Totally reasonable thing to say. 100%. When we talk about a systemic way of responding, you're including everyone in the interaction. You're not just making it one directional. Okay? So Emily, you're screaming at me, and I notice that I'm withdrawing. That's a systemic. Does that make sense? So
It's like the cause and effect.
I'm observing X in you, and I'm also observing Y in me in this moment.
You're not telling them how they are acting, you're telling them how you're responding to how they're acting.
Yeah,
And I'm perceiving them to act.
right.
Because they may
So-
not.
Oftentimes we communicate linearly. Right? A is to B kind of thing, right? But we gotta come full circle and say, how is that impacting each person in the interaction? Okay?
I feel like that works with my kids, never works with them.
Yeah. So, if I say I hate you, a third grade response would be what?
I hate you too.
I hate you too.
You smell.
Exactly. 100%. Now, you see adults saying that all the time. Third grade would be normal, right? Our process response would be, Emily, please change your tone of voice. Please change your language. Or, what do you hate about me? That's even better. Because now, if I say, Zach, I hate you. Now, and you say, what do you hate about me?
Yeah.
I have to like, oh shit. Now I have to like come up with what I hate about it. It catches you in your tracks.
Yeah, like what if I really don't, I was just looking.
Like I have no idea what I hate about them. I don't know. Make sense? Okay. I thought you were more competent. Maybe this comes up. I don't know, but it comes up for me all the time. I thought you were more competent. All right, so if I'm hiding behind my achievement, I'm like, well, I've been in the field for X number of years and I have these degrees and blah, 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 right? To prove that I am, right? A process response would be, please take the oh, hello? Please take the condescension out of your voice. Or what does confident mean to you? Okay? It's going to catch people in their tracks when you give a process response. Let's practice. Say something to the person next to you that's like pejorative or derogatory. Practice what you might say.
You're doing exercise.
How do you feel about that?
It sounded so mean. My tone of voice.
Yeah. We're talking about process responsive.
Does this make sense?
Yeah.
It does make a lot of sense.
Try it and roll.
I think it says recording.
Say something to you.
How many people are on the screen?
Did I just press it?
I'm doing
It's still
Okay.
Oh, you got it. Okay, great.
Okay.
You can leave it.
All right. So we as human beings gravitate towards what's familiar. What's our homeostasis? Right. So if I'm gonna have a homeostasis of hating someone, I'm always gonna gravitate back to that person sucks. Okay. If I have a homeostasis of being comfortable with somebody, I'm gonna work my very hardest in a moment of conflict to get back to that comfortable place. Does that make sense? It can go a lot of different ways.
Like, would that be for relationships? Like,
So if you're it could be any relationship. Let's say you're an agent and somebody is buying this, and you're used to having it be all business and just, very transactional. And then all of a sudden they show vulnerability, or all of a sudden you show vulnerability, and they're like, ooh, I don't know, this is awkward. We've never had this self-disclosure before. We've never kind of related in this way. What do we do? Then you have to navigate. Go ahead. Yeah.
Like homeostasis to me is like when you achieve like biophysiological equilibrium in your body, when your temperature is regulated and monitored, when you've attained like a contentment or kind of kind of controlled environment. So that's some of the physiological impact of homeostasis, and achieving that through like breathing exercises, mind control mechanisms, kind of like physical, spatial dimensions, things like that. So whenever someone is like getting really aggressive, it's like, maybe you want to take a deep breath with me?
Yep.
Or like I've done a presentation here where I'm like, let's take a deep collective breath. I'll usually start meetings off like that. Or like just like moving out of the way, you feel like there's like physical turmoil. So like, yeah, just kind of being spatially aware and reacting to it.
That's the ideal. The problem is a lot of people's homeostasis is complete chaos, complete dysregulation, complete conflict. I have a client who literally her homeostasis is fear. She fears everything, literally everything. Having a good day for her is like the most uncomfortable experience.
What happened?
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
A great deal of trauma and pain. But does that make sense? So everybody has a homeostasis. And sometimes it's very exactly what you described, and sometimes it's not. And so that's going to impact every interaction she has.
And it means that she will gravitate toward similar for people who don't challenge that make that.
You oftentimes gravitate to somebody who's going to reinforce your homeostasis. Okay, for better or worse.
How do you like work with someone that's in that state of mind and they're paranoid and always fearful and I've sometimes unimagined and unrealistic things that might be happening.
So oftentimes it's a gradual exposure, exposing the feared things, right? Even though they're not fearful to me, like I don't have a fear of the things that she does, but gradually doing that can be helpful. Going out of your comfort zone, developing insight about it. I find in my sessions with her, she's not capable of saying something good that happens, and then when she does, I call her out on it. I'm like, you just said something good. Let's stay here. Can we sit with this for 5 minutes? And invariably, she goes back to, yeah, but everything sucks and blah, 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 right? It's fascinating. But that's her homeostasis.
And experimentally, like some of your technique, like if she's afraid of spiders, you like gradually present spiders from a distance.
You
or
show a picture.
sometimes you just want to like
right.
put a spider on her head.
Yeah, so that's called gradual exposure. Systematic desensitization is the fancy word. But yes. So homeostasis does not mean good necessarily.
Yep.
Okay. So intimacy. I've been using that word a lot. Obviously, I don't only mean it in terms of sex. I mean it in terms of just closeness, being open with somebody, having trust. If you are in a situation, really any relationship, I imagine intimacy is a goal for some people, but also something that's highly avoided for others, depending on your history and who you are. Okay, so the gravity, what I mean by gravity here is the extent to which you go back to your homeostasis. There's something called the intimacy dance, okay, which basically means that at any given time, you have a certain degree of closeness with any person, right? But then all of a sudden, I come closer. And what happens? This person goes that way, right? To have the exact same amount of space at any given time. This person comes closer, I go this way, right? So it's like literally like a square dance. The key would be for both people to recognize it in that moment and say, hey, this is what's happening for us. Can we come closer? Can we, be in a situation where we can sit with that and hold space for it so that perhaps our homeostasis changes. So apply that to your roles.
I think that like over time, as I have gotten more comfortable sharing my boundaries with clients and actually having some,
Beautiful. Yeah.
that it has changed how some clients interact.
Yep.
Maybe not the same person interacting with me, but just how my clients in general will interact.
Yep.
And for some people, it's a connection point, but for others, it's a barrier instead of a boundary. And so it's just been interesting to see how different people interpret those things.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's happening whether we really notice it or not. Yeah.
Well, I know for us, so my role's different because I'm not an agent, or kind of agent. So Zach and I, part of our job is recruiting, and then also, the vendor program, I deal with different business and business owners. So, at first, and then it's similar to real estate agents, any business you're going to want to accept, like right off the jump, no matter how inappropriate this person might be or not a good fit, they might not be. So, what we learned and I learned is like how to kind of weed out who you actually want to be in business with, and who you want to do business with.
Good.
Because they might not be a good fit just on a relationship standpoint or a business standpoint.
Beautiful. Right. And you're navigating that, right? The two or however many people it is are negotiating. Right. Calling out that process though could take it one step farther. By asking questions, being curious, saying, what do you need, etc. Right? We've sort of already gone over this, but reflection without reference. Let's think about a time when you were in a fight with somebody. Can you think of that time? Probably like yesterday? No, kidding. How many times did you go, you use you, right? So you're reflecting on the situation by saying you and then whatever. You're blaming somebody from the beginning. That is very common. Everyone does that, right? So try doing that, taking that same scenario and reflecting on it without referring to the other person.
Wouldn't that be the I feel statement?
Yeah, I feel hurt. It wouldn't be when you. I feel hurt in this moment because when I was little, such and such happened to me and I'm feeling triggered. That makes sense. Right? If somebody is skilled, if the partner is skilled, or if whoever it is skilled, they were going to say, help me understand. What do you mean by hurt? They're going to give a response, a process response. What do you mean by hurt? How can I support you in this? Right, that's ideal. That's like who the hell interacts that way? Yeah, but that's kind of masterful.
That would be great. That'd be great. If a boyfriend could even do that.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
So if you're able to reflect without reference, you're able to change the intimacy, and most of the time it's closer.
Okay, but so my point of that is if you're constantly trying to avoid referring to a specific person and only pointing out how it is affecting you, doesn't that make it difficult for that other person to reflect on their behavior more so, other than just how I'm going to take it? Because if you're dealing with somebody and you're not deflecting, but avoiding trying to blame them, then that person could be the type of person that's going to blame everybody else anyway. And now you're just constantly telling them how you're being made to feel, but they're not going to take responsibility because you're always trying to.
Great question.
Not.
So, and I are in a fight, and I say, I'm feeling really angry. You say, whatever you're going to say.
That's your problem. That's my problem.
Right? I might say, what I need in this moment is for both of us to understand what's happening. What's happening between us? That's not blaming. That's what is happening. And then the other person probably is going to be unskilled and be like, well, you're doing this and blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay. But what is happening between us? The energy between us is this. Is there a way we can fix the energy right now? Is there a way that both of us can reflect on each other, on our own roles? Because it's never 100% and 0. Sometimes it's 99-1.
Right, but there's always.
Right, but it's never one person's fault. Yeah.
All right, so for the second time today, I'm going to solicit some free relationship advice from you.
Okay.
Not applicable to real estate, at least.
That's fine.
So somebody who I'm close to, recently forgot a day that was important.
Okay.
And I haven't addressed it with them yet, because I haven't had a chance to talk to them one-on-one. But how can I do this kind of exercise when I'm specifically referring to the fact that you forgot about this and that hurt me?
So you go into personal narrative, which is what we're going to talk about in a minute, which is clearly that has some significance to you as an individual, regardless of this other person, right? So you go into, I feel hurt or whatever you feel, because when I was little, such and such, whatever, right? So you give personal story around it. If you're able to be vulnerable, most likely, hopefully, the other person's going to be like, oh, that makes sense. I totally get that. I was an ass, right? It's going to elicit insight, hopefully. We can't always have that.
I think it comes down to you can't control how other people respond to the things. You can only control your interaction and how you respond.
Yes, I agree.
So like if so you can do all of that, you could be, you can reflect without referencing and they will look at you and be like, you suck.
That's where.
And we can't control that. We can only control the space that we inhabit in our own minds, and how we respond to it.
So a lot of what these tools will do is give you power, relational. You can't, the ideal would be the power is loud, meaning every single person in the interaction has power, right? But these tools, at least at the very least, give you ownership, give you power, give you agency. Does that make sense? Hopefully those people or all people have that, because of these, but we can't control it.
So, sorry, so going on with that, it's understandable, I mean, it's known, you can't control how everyone else is going to act and, treat you, but what happens when trying to express how their behavior or their actions have affected you, gets you nowhere, and you're I don't want to say the word stuck, but you you have to deal with them on a daily basis. And there's no resolution because you can't
See eye to eye.
right.
It's difficult. For sure.
So if you're the
Yeah,
person that
so-
has to constantly control yourself and keep the I guess the vibe, even and comfortable, doesn't that eventually in the end give you more stress if you can't?
It's very exhausting
Right.
to be skilled at this, to be honest. Yeah. Because that means that everyone else around you likes the business. Which is very hard.
Which is almost,
Yeah.
but it's
So-
almost like you're enabling that
Yeah.
person to continue the behavior.
But one thing that you can do, which maybe this wouldn't work for you, but it's helpful for me, is to say what you need in that moment. I need a different way of interacting. I need your communities to change. Can you please rephrase what you said? How I heard that was. I don't think that was your intention. Can you please rephrase? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How I experienced you just now, right, is how you want to highlight it. Maybe that's not how they intended it.
Also, I would say in that sense, I'm a Gemini, so I like peace, but I'm also petty. And so sometimes being the person that is constantly, this is how this made me feel, this is and just having that consistency will do more to further your satisfaction and frustrate them than anything that them owning up to would ever end up doing.
Right.
That's where the power comes
Yeah,
in.
if you get to be the,
I get that.
So you're saying, like when I went to therapy last year, she was like, it's not about what the other person is gonna say back to you, it's about how you feel. So if it's gonna make you feel better, express yourself and move on, even if they don't answer you, if they don't care.
Yep.
It's all about how you feel in that moment, just express yourself, so then you're not sleepless at night or tossing and turning or it's really bothering you. It's more about how you feel to get it out there.
I would add one thing to that though, is that as long as you are expressing yourself in a way that maintains your power. Because if I'm saying, fuck you, and all these things, I'm giving away my power.
Yeah.
100%.
See, so now this is the other thing. I'm more of a person where I'm so calm that my friends are like, you're actually too nice and too calm in some situations.
Yep.
Like they're like, I actually wish you were a bitch, or I wish you were more stern. So people in certain situations, you don't get walked all over.
Yep.
Which I get that because I am a very nice person.
Totally.
It's actually annoying, but that's just how I am. I'm laid back. Like I don't,
He doesn't like to hurt other people.
I don't like
But
right.
But that's a beautiful part of you, and I get that can also be.
And people could see that as a weakness. So they're like, I wish you would curse this person the fuck out for once. And I'm like, I don't even know how to do that. Or if I do that, I feel like it's not my character. Exactly.
And why are they trying to control how you respond to certain things?
Because they feel like I'm too nice in certain situations and I should be more of a little bit more stern. So maybe there's a way to be stern and show the other person I'm serious without
Yeah.
being not my character.
So,
Yeah.
Monique,
You know?
what you just said is beautiful. It's right related to what we're just about to talk
Right.
about, which is these things called personalizations. Okay, so what this is essentially, everyone has them, is that when, however we grew up, maybe it was great, maybe it wasn't, we developed ways of existing based on our surroundings that influenced our feelings. And oftentimes that influences the way we see things, okay? So we all have something that's a personalization that gets us, right? For me, 100%, it's feeling rejected. I was bullied for 7 years, right? So I see things as rejecting, right? Without that person even intending to. The other day, a friend of mine said, Emily, I like you a lot better now that you're a parent. So I've known her for like 20 years. Literally 20 years.
I'm not rejecting you. I'm
Okay.
just gonna
Right, so I went on this journey, right? I went on this path, right, for like 10 seconds. I was like, she never liked me, she's not even my friend, she's rejected, right? So that's what the journey I went on.
Yeah.
Okay, so because I've done a ton of work on myself, because I'm like, ooh, I've gone on this journey so many times, I know it by heart, right? I came back from it very quickly. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, you used to be a complete nutcase. And I was like, I totally agree. I was an anxious ball of like, whoa, growing up. You know what I mean? But now she said, seeing you as a mom be so calm and be so collected and be so like laid back is beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if I had been stuck in my personalization of, oh my God, she doesn't like me, like she's been putting on this ruse for 15 years, you know, I would never have gotten that beautiful moment of inner intimacy.
Right, of which she's really thinking.
Right? So I was curious in that moment rather than feeling, you know, defensive. Right.
What did you say? I'm curious what makes you say that. Is that what you asked her?
I said, what do you mean?
Okay.
And then she was like, you were blank in college or whatever it was. And I said, yeah, I have been making a conscious effort not to show so much anxiety as a mom because I don't want to project that on to my kids. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right. So, and I said, I really appreciate you pointing that out, like that you noticed that. Right. And we kind of preserved our intimacy in that moment. That could have gone very differently.
You could have went home and
So if I'm maintaining my, you know, my rejection personalization, my husband's gonna be like, how did it go today? And I'll be like, oh my gosh, everyone rejected me. People walked out, people came in late, people were on their phones, people were, you know, drinking water, like everything that I experienced would be they rejected me.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the problem is that because every single person has multiple of these, we exist thinking the worst of people for most of the time. Does that make sense? So that's where being curious, asking for something to be rephrased, giving a process response is very important. Okay? Is someone brave enough to give me their personalization? Anybody else?
I mean, I always believe that I grew up queer in the South, and that has a massive impact on most of the ways I interpret the world.
Yeah.
From very different ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So, you know, that colors
Yeah.
literally everything that I do and say is my southernness and my queerness, and how it's funny as a kid, one half of that was rejected in culture, and then as an adult, the other half is rejected in culture. Living up here now, because I'm very southern, and there's a lot about me that people don't always interact with, because I don't put it out there as much. But like, it's an interesting dichotomy to kind of navigate the two bigger pieces of my identity, having at different levels of not just necessarily, but how people encounter them as different.
Yeah, absolutely. So we all have something.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
what was growing up weird and stuff like?
Wonderful. Roll Tide. Yeah. It was great, except for the parts that weren't. I mean, honestly, that's kind of the thing. It's taken a while to feel that way, but the truth is, the parts that weren't great, and the parts that were great were wonderful, and all of that impacts who I am as a person. So
That's beautiful. Right, that's good. Yeah. So there's this thing called repetition compulsion. I'm throwing all these terms at you. Sorry, but what happens to us when we have these personalizations? Because we like homeostasis, we elicit that from others. So if my personalization is rejection, I'm going to do behavior that elicits rejection from other people. I'm going to be condescending. I'm going to be, what did I have here? Be clingy. I'm going to cross boundaries so that somebody else rejects me. You're not doing it on purpose. This is not like conscious. Okay? But this happens all the time.
Are you talking like self-sabotage behavior?
Yeah, it's self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'm going to elicit rejection from all of you or from anyone else that I interact with if I'm stuck in my repetition compulsion.
right.
Because of homeostasis. This is if you haven't done work on yourself. I'm not saying everybody stays in this place, but this happens a lot. So the next time somebody is overbearing, crosses boundaries, etc., ask yourself, I wonder if there's some rejection, repetition compulsion happening. Light bulb? Yeah. Okay, so defenses. We've all heard the id, the ego, the superego. I'm not going to go into this, not a psychology class, but the reason why this is important is because we all have the id, which is like our gratification. I need this immediately kind of thing. When then we have the superego that says, no, hold on, like let's slow things down. Is this okay? Then morality principle. The ego is kind of the judge in between, saying, is this, how can we kind of resolve this conflict, or how can we, sit with two things at once? Does that make sense? Okay. So Jen was the ego in my situation with the buying the house. My husband was like, nope, let's do this right away. Like, we need the house immediately. This is a fantastic house. Right? And I'm like, yeah, but the yard's too big, and does that make sense? I'm like, oh no, like I can't commit to this, right? It's way too much for us. I feel like we don't deserve this, right? So I'm sitting over there that way, and Jen was like, okay, both can be true. How can we sit with this, right? And then kind of talking it through, okay? So defenses are very important because oftentimes they kind of mitigate against anxiety. So noticing what's happening for you in a given moment, oftentimes you're trying to avoid anxiety when a defense is activated. Okay? So it connects back to identity, because everyone's going to have different triggers. Everyone's going to have different stuff, right, based on their identities. Some people are very, as you've been describing, some people are very calm. Some people are very boisterous. Some people, loud, whatever it is. But all of those things are seemingly related to defenses. Okay? So some major examples that show up relationally: blame, condescension, criticism, anger. So anger is not actually a primary emotion. I know you learned that in kindergarten. I get that. Anger is a defense. Anger covers up another feeling. If you really want to piss someone off in an argument, you ask them, what's underneath your anger? I do that all the time. It's fascinating. Someone's really angry, and I'm like, you're not actually angry. What's underneath your anger? Because most of the time, it's fear, it's insecurity, it's feeling abandoned, it's feeling lonely, whatever other feeling there is. Anger covers it up. Because again, our iceberg, we show what's on top, right? And most of the time, we are comfortable showing anger. because that's what society tells us is how we should respond to each other. Okay? Thoughts? Questions?
I know, right?
Yeah.
Like, that was,
So,
he's.
I do a joke, I think it's
Yeah.
but the other day, my husband did it to me, and I'm like, oh, I'm so mad. But he was totally right, you know, so you can catch yourself in those moments. And if you're able to sit with it and say, okay, what is underneath my anger? Think of the last time you were angry.
I was hurt.
Hurt, beautiful. What other emotions were underneath it?
I felt disrespect.
Disrespected, yeah.
Scared.
Scared, yeah. So if you're able to say, rather than saying I'm angry, you're able to say I'm hurt. I'm feeling disrespected, right? That goes a lot farther relationally in being able to communicate. You can do a lot more with it. Someone says I'm angry, I have no idea what that
I
means,
feel like nobody wants to respond to that.
right? But it creates distance.
Yeah.
It ends the conversation. It cuts off dialogue.
What if you say I'm angry
You
and
say
say
I'm angry.
I'm hurt?
Nobody wants to go near that with a 10-foot pole.
Right, I see what
Right?
you
Does that make sense?
mean. Mhm.
Hurt. Maybe people don't want to go near that either, but it's vulnerable.
Right, so they're a little more.
So
cautiously
you're sort of showing part of yourself when you're saying I'm hurt, which is inviting the other person to do the same thing. Does that make sense? Okay. This is just a list of defense mechanisms that I'm not going to go through, but these are the classic ones.
I'm like, wait,
I think you're going to get this presentation. Okay.
I'm gonna pull this out in the middle of like arguments and be like, wait, let me diagnose you.
So the reality is defenses are learned. We're not born with defenses. We learn them from our interactions with other people, from how they were modeled for us, for better or worse. Okay, so these are some big ones: denial, anger, blame, vulnerability, happy. So happy is an interesting one. The people in my life who aren't always happy really piss me off. Because I'm like, dude, you can't always be happy.
I agree.
Right? There's something else there. Does that make sense?
The iceberg.
Yeah, it's the iceberg.
Yes.
It's a
like,
defense.
it's the third
It's a defense.
shift, it's
Absolutely.
happy.
Yeah. Okay. So we want to think about the energy around defenses, the intensity that's happening in the moment. Okay? Because oftentimes there's a ton of intensity, but nobody calls it out. You're not processing it. You're not understanding it. Okay? So taking time to do that can be helpful. If you become defensive in response to something, okay, that's natural, that's human, but you also lose your power.
How do we not lose power?
You ask questions. You're curious.
Yeah, but does anybody else find that when they ask the questions in those moments that it just makes you angrier and you become even more, or is that just me?
Why does it make you angry?
Right, but
However, I would change one thing about
yes, please.
What's
which
underneath?
is
What is
don't start with one.
What's underneath
Tell
here?
me about what. Tell me.
Tell me about what's happening for you.
Okay, so if you're trying to say, I'm logically trying to get to the bottom of why we have this current situation or this disagreement or whatever, and I ask a question about why they're doing something or thinking something. So you're telling me that that's not wrong?
It's like
Maybe that's
asking
wrong?
a teenager how their day was at school. I don't know. That's fine. No idea. Right? We're not gonna be able to answer why. And then what, how, when. Pretty much any other
Just not much.
question work. Yeah. Why makes you stuck a lot of the time.
So what makes you feel, or, you know,
What's happening for us in this moment? How can we feel closer right now? How can we understand, each person's perspective? Things like that.
How can we find common
So how can we find common ground?
So the quarrel isn't about the action, it's about the reaction and how we're both taking that.
Most of the time, it's not actually about why.
Mm.
It's not actually about why you're arguing or the content around it.
So this is
It's how you're arguing. It's how you're arguing. I like to call this a dishwasher argument. You're not arguing about the dishes not being done. You're arguing because you feel disrespected, or you feel like you're taking on all the work, or does that make sense? There's a ton of stuff underneath it. It's a dishwasher argument, 100%. Okay?
Which is different from how you load the dishwasher. Right? That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
different, okay. Oh, yeah, or even
Okay, so notice how I didn't put why on this slide.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are some examples. Search for empathy and compassion. It takes choice to do that. It takes a ton of strength to do that sometimes. Sometimes you don't want to do that.
Mhm.
Okay? All right, here we go. Activity. So think about a relational defense that you have. Okay? Think about the people you tend to be more defensive around. What is it about them? Where did you learn it? Where did you learn the defense? Okay. What else do I have up here? What did you observe? What did you watch from it? You don't need to take a ton of time, but anything resonating here? What did you notice about yourself? Yeah, Dan.
This is very, it feels very prescient, thinking about, not real estate at all, but
Yeah.
aging parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who are not, they're far from being Asian parents, but they are beginning, at the very beginning of that
Yeah.
process, and we have just finished, or in the final stage of going through it with their parents. And so I find I get defensive with my father, and he gets defensive with me in the same way that he is, like, it is replicable, and I'm aware of it, and yet it is still, we have not integrated
So
that.
on that point, what's happening for you is, I imagine there's some similarities.
A little bit.
Right. So oftentimes, I don't know about you, but for me, the people that I get most defensive around are the people that are like me. I could not be in a relationship with me as a man. I would literally hurt myself.
Yeah.
It would be awful.
Yeah.
Right? I could not. Yeah.
Mhm.
It would just drive me insane. Right? So yeah. So that's why, again, like,
But why not? You're so amazing, and you have so much technique and training.
I appreciate that, but I'm just showing part of my
Oh,
iceberg.
30%.
I self-describe as a lot. And so that's kind of the starting point.
Right, but most of the time, the reason why this is connected to identity is because most of the time, when we're defensive, right, we're showing parts of ourselves that either is being projected on, right, from somebody else, maybe our parents or, siblings or whomever, right, but there's a piece there, okay? So practicing empathy and compassion, again, will take a lot of work. Sometimes it takes choice, active choice. All right. What do you notice about what's happening for you? Right. This is where mindfulness comes in, right? Like we were just describing. What's happening in your body? Where do you feel it in your body? How intense is it? Right. Those are great questions to ask yourself. If you ask that to somebody else, they may or may not be on board with that. Okay. The other question I love, which is like so clinical, sorry, it's like a nerd, but is what function is this serving right now? What function is our anger serving? I love that question. Because most of the time, if it's a conflict, the function is keeping distance. Okay? We're not going to get through everything, sorry. So fostering identity, again, we've sort of been talking about this the whole time, but shame is very important as a feeling. Shame is often very deep down in our iceberg. We don't show that very often, but why is it important to feel?
Well, it's almost like self-regulation.
Uh-huh.
Feel shame over something. In some cases, it's not something that you should do again.
Okay, good. It provides you with a moral compass.
Yeah.
Tells you what's right and wrong. Yep. Okay. What else?
So what was the trigger for reflection?
Yeah,
Did you
good.
feel like we have to check in or something happening?
Yeah, but don't you also think that sometimes that shame that you feel inside isn't really real? It's just something that you have somehow grown to believe you should be ashamed of?
You want to ask yourself, where is it coming from? Because most of the time it's coming from something in your memory, some story, some narrative. Okay, so that's where the reflection comes in. Okay, internal versus external. So is your identity based on outward, like things you own and the clothes you have and the sort of external stuff, or is it based on internal qualities like I did with that exercise? Okay, it's different for everybody, but you just want to understand that about yourself. And then upon what is your identity based? Different question for everybody. Attachment and borrowing. So basically, for everyone's identity, it comes from attachment. How we learn about the world, oftentimes through the lens of our upbringings. Okay? Borrowing means that if let's see, I'm thinking, I apologize for using my kids as an example. I hope that's okay. But it's a perfect example because toddlers do it perfectly. Adults don't. Okay? Which is that if a toddler's crying, my son is crying, he's 2.